everybody in high school or everybody around the world should be able to hear his speech.
I think it's all things that we need to hear, and I think it's things that have been lost from past generations. It's the same values that my parents try to raise me on.
I think this was amazing, what he said to us. It will change me, actually.
My name is Gary Horton. I was born in Indiana. At the age of 31, it was a radical decision to join the United States Army, and I became an Army Ranger. Everybody glad to get out of class? Yeah, pretty good. I was trained with the Ranger battalions, and I had some special forces training. When I got out of that, I found myself in a position where I might be able to speak about America and my convictions and my faith in the school systems. And so I've been in the schools all of these 35 years, and I feel like I'm the richest man that ever lived because I have a voice to the youth of America. I do live in LA, that's Lower Alabama. Ever get lost, you're probably in Alabama. By the way, I might even have relatives here today. Half the cars your family own don't run. Hey, cuz, what's up? Can they hear your car before they see it? Yeah, I got some cousins out there. Has your mother ever been in a fist fight at a football game and won? There it is. Of course, I'll never be the man my mother was. You didn't mess with my lady, boy. She's tougher than woodpecker lips, you know what I'm saying? Does your mother own a homemade fur coat? You love your pets, recycle them. Has your family ever been asked to leave the zoo for harassing the monkeys? Does the TV that you have at home that works sitting on a TV that don't work? Come on now. There we go. Come on. By the way, you guys think you got it tough? We had to get up to change the channels. That was a good line. Went right over your head. And don't try to tell us to say no to crack. We just pull up our overalls. It was outside of college that I was interested in music. I've always loved music, especially the old rock and roll years, and so I picked up a guitar and began to hum and strum a little bit and traveled in a rock band with a group called the Young American Showcase.
I pressed a kiss up to your lips. What could I do but linger? And as I ran my hand through your hair, a cootie bit my finger. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I enjoyed that adventure, and then when I got out of there, I had a prison outreach in the state of Florida. I was speaking in 6 prisons, and then I realized that somehow I'm going to have to change my format because I want to get the clay before it turns to brick, and when these guys are locked up, it's like cement. They're all mixed up and firmly set. If you ever get around a prison late at night, you might listen to somebody singing a little bit of the freedom song. I'm only going to do a little of it because I don't want to be too controversial here. In the middle of the night, you might hear someone singing the verses of the freedom song. It sounds like this. Want to hear the second verse? But then I decided to join the United States Army and give something back to my country because freedom's not a spectator sport. And from that, I had the chance to get involved with schools, thanks to the United States Recruiting Command out of Texas. What a time to be alive. Live in a country where people now are expressing their frustration and anger by killing everybody around them. How does that happen? By the way, they do find a common denominator, these violent people that want to take people down before they die. Video games. Violent video games. See, it proves that what you sow, you reap. What you reap, you eat. Life tastes bad. Guess who's cooking? I found myself in my early teens very bitter, very mad at some of the injustices of life. You know, we all run into hypocrites. We're all a part of that agenda. And so I went to a youth camp that was run, that they ran in Indiana. It was a rescue mission, and they figured if the parents are screwed up, maybe the kids need some help. So I was invited to go to this camp, and I went, but I was a troublemaker. I tried to prove that all of this stuff was just smoke and mirrors. So I made a fool of myself, and then I came back a year later and did it again. And then they told me that I wasn't coming back. And all of a sudden, my mask began to come off. And I remember looking at these dear folks, and I told them that, I said, look, I'll come back and cut grass. And they said, no, you don't need grass cutters. I said, I can wash dishes. We've got a lot of dishes here. And they finally made it clear, you're not coming back, because I had made such a fool of myself. And then I stood there and stared at the ground and said, I have no one else but you guys. You're the only thing. You're my only hope. Don't throw me away. So they asked me if I'd come back under the disguise of a counselor, junior counselor. I said, what's a junior counselor? That's somebody who works with the adult. And they said, we're going to give you all the troublemakers because you seem to fit in with those. And so I came back the next year, and I was a junior counselor. And now I found myself 55 years later still caring about troubled kids because I was one. I don't know how that woman got into the room. Couldn't miss her gaudy clothes and the strong sweet perfume. But she went straight to Jesus' feet, stopped and stood right there. Cried, wiped his feet with tears and dried them with her hair. All the women in my town, none was more well known for the flagrant sin that she lived in, all the wickedness she sown. He didn't try to stop her. I guess the prophet couldn't tell that the woman that was touching him is the kind you buy and sell. I had no idea what Jesus planned to do. He said, Simon, there's something I need to say to you. I said, teacher, if it's on your mind, go ahead and tell me what you will. He began to speak to me. The room went quickly still. He said, take a good look at this woman now. In spite of all her fears, she kissed me and anointed me, wiped my feet with tears. She's honored me, but you've been only rude to me instead. You gave no kiss of me, no anointing on my head. And her sins are red as scarlet, but now they're washed away. The loving face she showed me is the only price she has to pay. For the depth of God's forgiveness is much deeper than the sea. In spite of what you think of her, she's beautiful to me. When I got out of the Army, I went back to Houston, Texas, where I joined the military, and didn't have any idea what I was going to do next. I figured somehow, some way, God's still going to find a place for me because I was determined to serve him, no matter what it cost. Because I had been a part of a Ranger detachment years earlier, we did a halftime show between the Oilers and the Falcons where we did things like rappel from the apex of Houston Astrodome and did some hula stuff and, you know, go Army. And it was during that time that I came back and started working for Chrysler Corporation, selling Dodge cars and trucks, that the recruiters came and asked me to stand in a booth and help them recruit. I said, what do you want me to do? They said they were going to put up a booth and see if they could get kids to come in and try to put me down. You know, they wanted to get a little tough here. They wanted to push, you know, they wanted to figure get a crowd. I said, well, man, we could get a crowd. I said, but what if it gets personal? What are you going to do about that? And I said, by that time, I told him, I said, gentlemen, you're on the wrong, you got the wrong frequency. You're on the defense. You need to get on the offense. I said, you got the greatest program in the world. You can get a kid out of high school, give him money for college, kick him off the fence, give him a backbone of respect, and make him feel like he's a patriot. He's giving something back. Because if the majority of this country the freedoms are being preserved by the minority, how long is it going to last? They acknowledged that they felt that's exactly what kids need to hear. And then one of them said, when you want to do it? And I said, well, I got a job, but I gave them one day. It was back in May of '78, and I drove to Waco area, Belton, Texas, and spoke in about 3 schools. Just had no idea what I was going to do. There's no manual on this. I told them, I said, I can't take your money. I'm not a recruiter, but don't tell me what I can or cannot say, because I was always going to include the most dramatic part of my existence, and that is my personal faith in Jesus Christ. It's the only thing that recycled my miserable life years ago. Back in 2004, I had the tremendous privilege of traveling to Afghanistan. I took some buddies with me, and we went over there to say thank you to so many of these wonderful men and women who are leaving their families and their jobs and their friends, and sometimes their life. What a privilege it was to stand in front of them and make it personal, to thank them for the sacrifice. Because freedom is never free. That stuff doesn't last until somebody stands up to the opposition. And right now there's a big debate whether or not America has any respect left in the world today. When all these things take place and we just talk about it. Young people, we haven't won a war since 1945. But we still got, thank God, a handful of men and women who will travel around the world and fight and die for people who hate us, who want to see us destroyed as a nation. That takes a lot of courage. Takes a lot of guts. After doing a few schools, they started getting phone calls from those principals who heard me, and they said, when's this guy coming back? Because they were calling other schools saying, you need to hear this guy. This guy's got something to say. And I still don't remember what I did back then, but I did the best I could, because I do care about kids. I've always cared about them, ever since I realized somebody cared for me. Now it's been 35 years. I've covered somewhere between 7,500 or 8,000 schools in 46 states, and I'm hoping that some of the people out there that had a chance to hear me in their school or in their town, I would hope that one day we could pull together and start making a difference instead of just making a living in this country.
It inspired me that this person just cares for people this much.
This past summer, I lost my best friend, and not a day went by that I didn't think of, wanting to go up there with him. But he showed to me that it's not worth taking your own life.
Everything he said was just amazing, and it spoke to everybody, and you could just feel like the inspiration and like patriotism, like unifying all of us like together.
I've been told for years that freedom isn't free and that people sacrifice their lives every day for this country, but I never understood that as much as I did today when he talked to us.
Many years ago, when I started doing schools in the Austin, Texas area, I ran into a very special man who happened to be the aide to the governor. His name was Alan Clark. He was a double amputee as a Special Forces captain in Vietnam. He was one of the youngest men to graduate from West Point, and back on June 17, 1967, at a fire base in Vietnam, an artillery round came and amputated both legs. All he remembers is that the medic kept hitting him, and he finally came to enough to say, "Why are you hitting me? Help me on my feet." The medic said, "I'm not hitting you, Captain. I'm giving you morphine. You don't have any feet." Well, Alan has been a servant of this country ever since, and often speaks across the country on certain occasions which demand his kind of professionalism and his presentation. He works for the VA hospital a lot. Well, many years ago, I was invited to speak to the Ole Miss Rebel football team the gentleman that asked me if I wanted to speak to the team. He had his son was a walk-on at Ole Miss, and I said, yes, sir, I'd be glad to talk to the team. Then he asked me if there was somebody that he would like to have join us, and I said, yes, sir. There's a gentleman named Alan Clark in the Dallas, Texas area, and I said I'd love Alan to join us. He's got a tremendous story. Well, we sent him a ticket. He flew in. When I introduced Alan and his credentials, he stood up on those artificial limbs and made it to the podium and showed such poise. And he looked at the football players and said, gentlemen, I've got good news. I was 5'9" when I went to Vietnam. And then he said, I didn't lose my legs. God gave me surgery so I could stand tall, taller than I've ever stood in my life. And that kind of presentation shows the victory to overcome the obstacles, not submit to them. And what I loved about Alan, he gave me some criticism many years ago about how I was speaking. He said, many kids can see your war, but they can't see your heart. And he said, I'm going to pray that God tones you down a little bit and gives you more of a poised approach to the kids because they're not understanding where you're coming from. And so I thanked him. But when we spoke to the football team, obviously he listened to me and made the comment later that night in the hotel room that he said, I need to pray more. He said, you're not there yet. He said, I need to pray for you right now. That's when he reached down and began to take off each of his artificial limbs. And then when he slid off the bed on his stumps, it was a little hard to concentrate if you've ever seen a crippled man praying for you on his stumps. And then he said a prayer that I'll never forget. It was all heart, to say the least. And by the next day, I had a whole new approach to speaking to young people. I had the America outline that I now use. I said, Alan, it's only God could send me someone like you to kick me where I need it when you have no feet to kick with. I don't care how you read me, but I have been married 48 years with the greatest woman I ever met by accident because I know what love does. Love doesn't hurt. Do you realize that almost half of married women in this country are terrorized in their own home? What's that all about? You got a father who abuses you and your brothers and your mom? Domestic violence? Well, I got a cure for some of that. But you wouldn't want to put the power in my hands. Why do we spend all that money to put people in prison? Do you realize what it costs to keep somebody incarcerated? They could send you to the finest colleges on planet Earth for a whole lot less than what it costs to lock up a bunch of maniacs. But you wouldn't want to talk to me about what I think we ought to do about the violence and the criminals and the rapists in this country. And those who mess with little kids, boy, have I got a cure for them. You see, love fights back. Love defends. Love protects. God made Solomon write his story in the book of Ecclesiastes, which is considered the frantic search. And he had everything, everybody thinks if I had enough money, if I had enough women, if I had enough booze, if I had enough of the world's pleasure, I'd be happy. He kept saying, life sucks without the truth. And it's true. No matter who you are, you keep drawing in, feeding on air. You just keep sucking in all these things into your system because you're in a frantic search for happiness. And the thing is, it's not the perks, it's the person, it's the source. Until you know the source of all this, you'll never know what happiness is. It's not having, it's being. And that only comes through a relationship with the Almighty, with God Himself, to be able to recycle our agenda, our thought patterns. That's what's so hard to convince delinquents or see anyone else. Until you change your mind, you never change what you do. Because your thoughts become your words become your actions form your habits form your character, and your character summarizes your destiny. Until you change this, you'll never change this. But to admit to yourself that I'm eat up with lousy mindset. I'm eat up with insecurities. I'm always looking at the bad side. The glass is half full or half empty. Well, it depends on how thirsty you are. It's a question of why you hanging up, why you get hung up on non-essentials. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. But how do you know what the main thing is? If you don't know the creator, if you don't know the one who put you here, if you don't go back to the head coach, how are you going to play the game? It's not a matter of just, let's just swag it. You know, that's an old Army expression, which means scientific wild-ass guess. That's no way to live in life. You can't walk through the minefield of hypocrisy and hope to survive if you don't know where you're stepping. You don't know where you're going. You're herd-bound until you can plant your feet and develop some convictions. See, it's not the courage of life, it's the convictions. Courage is nothing but conviction anyway. It's what you really believe, it's what you know to be true, and you can defend it. They say 40% of the people that show up at church every Sunday, they cannot tell you what the most important thing in life is, they cannot tell you what they believe, they cannot tell you why they believe it, and rarely in their entire life will they ever get out of their comfort zone and share a good news message that Christ can change your life. Christ can give you eternal life. He can help you face eternity so that you can face today until you can face eternity. Because that's the name of the game. That's where priorities come down. Those who live in the light of eternity get this life in the deal. But if you live for this life alone, you can lose them both. That's the whole crux of living. It's like a GPS, a godly positioning system. If you listen to it, if you study it, it'll get you where you want to go. But if you just say, well, that sounds good, but I don't feel like you know what you're talking about, then if you're not going to use the GPS, don't buy the sucker. If you don't know how to navigate, then find out how that God can lead you, guide you, and provide for you, and give you solutions to the questions of life. You're not going to get them in philosophy. You're not going to get them in the educational system. You educate a fool, you make them dangerous. You're going to be impressed with all this knowledge you have, and it won't take you, it won't get you, down the block. It's a question of wisdom. What's wisdom? It's the application of truth to life. How can you differentiate between what is real and what is pseudo? How do you know a counterfeit when somebody hands it to you? Unless you spend time with the real deal.
America isn't what it was meant to be right now. God sent him here to speak to us and get us to change that.
Like, I completely agree with every word he said, and there needs to be more people like him.
I think this program really spoke to a lot of the kids here. I could see the responses and hear the responses from some of the kids that it was really, really speaking to them, and I think that's a great thing. We need that. So.
When I was here before, I think I told you about the red, white, and blue. Especially my grandson gives it to you. The red is courage and valor. The blue is justice and honor, and the white, purity and righteousness. And I'm so glad that my grandson knew that there's only one way, one truth, and one life to prepare for eternity. And that's to put your faith, your simple childlike faith, in the work of Christ. Just ask him to be your Savior. Just a simple word. I need a Savior. Father, I need your boy in my life. I need Christ. That's all. Because you know my boy is already in heaven. It's been 2 years since August 1st that I lost him.
I have a grandson, a marvelous young man named Shane Stathers. My daughter didn't necessarily marry up, but you know, you do the best you can with your children. And when you've only got one child and you're in the spiritual battle of life, you know that child's going to be hit. But there was a time when I got her and my grandson out of that house because he was in harm's way. And he lived with me, and he lived with us, my daughter, my wife Ruth, and myself. And every day that I was home with him, it was a delight to be in the same room, to be with this young man. His heart was so special. He was so hungry for spiritual things. He was so delightful. He had a marvelous sense of humor. It was beautiful to be with him. I've never had a bad moment with him. He would always sit in the booster chair behind the driver's seat, and we would sing together, and we would pray together, and I always would tell him Grampy loves Shane, and he would always respond by saying Shane loves Grampy. And every day that we would greet him, we would ask him the same question, Shane, what day is it? And he would always respond, this is the day the Lord has made, we will rejoice and be glad in it. And then he would go, yippee. And yippee was his response to that promise, because if every day that God, if this is a day that God has given and that we will rejoice in it, it means that you're living by faith and you're trusting him every day, which is what the Christian life's all about. But if you have confidence in the fact that he is in charge of your life, then you have a lot to be excited about and happy about, because every day is a gift. That's why they call it the present. But it was that dark night, August 1st, 2011, that a man knocked on the front door from the highway patrolman to tell us that our boy had just been killed at 4 o'clock that afternoon. And the trauma involved with losing an 8-year-old child that you adore and you love, and they love you back, what a challenge, what a gut check, because kids are not supposed to die. But the point is, if God's a perfect giver, then he's a perfect taker. And in a moment of agony and pain, you either react or you respond. There's no room for bitterness. There's no room for why did God take my child? There's no place in the plan of God where you question him. He knows what he's doing, and he's not going to explain himself to any of us. You learn that from the book of Job. I mean, what do you get out of the book of Job? The one thing you learn from the book is that you don't ask. You just trust, or you go nuts. Now he speaks through me when I do schools. He actually came to me weeks before he died and said, Grampy, I hope one day I can talk to kids the way you do. And I said to him, Shane, you'll do it better than I ever did.
God and the soldier, all men adore in times of trouble, but never before. When the trouble's gone, the wrong has been cited. God is forgotten and the soldier slighted. May it never be in Belleville High School. Thank you. God bless America.
If your goal today was to reach one kid, you reached that one kid. After the presentation this morning, I encountered him in the hallway, and he was so moved, it took him probably 10 minutes to gain his composure and get back to class.
I want to say thank you. I want to thank you for really just saying that word to me.
Thank you so much. Listen, I can't tell you how much I appreciate everything you said. I want it written down. I want you in my classroom. I want to know you personally in my classroom. Thank you so much.
And so I've been doing this now all these years, and I'm going to do it until I see my Lord.